Hello everyone, this is a very quick review of Final Fantasy XIV, an MMORPG that released on September 30th, 2010 worldwide to critical and commercial failure. So why the hell am I reviewing it? Why do I bother? I already told you it sucked on launch. This is entirely pointless, so I have no choice but to kill myself. Anyway, I wanted to showcase the game a little bit because it's improved a hell of a lot over the past 2 years. It went from a nigh unplayable, buggy mess with poorly mapped controls and an impossible user interface to what it should have been in the first place, a game. In its current state, I believe this is what it should have been like at launch, which is why I'm going to do a quick review of it before the much touted version 2 hits and Final Fantasy XIV changes completely. Again. Also, one more thing, this was thrown together over 3 or 4 nights, so please excuse the quality of the review and the way I lazily put everything in sections. Fuck you, I do what I want. FF14 has 3 starting areas, and they are huge. There's Limsa Lominsa, the city by the water, Ul'dah, the city in the sand, and Gridania, the city in the forest. First off, Limsa Lominsa is a surprisingly labyrinthine piece of crap. The layout of the city sucks and doesn't make sense, like they drew the map with the buildings and stuff already in it and then decided where everything would go afterwards. Ul'dah is, thankfully, much more manageable with its classic spoked wheel MMO design. Gridania is the worst. Everything on the map is positioned very carefully to make sure that the next place you need to go to is always on the opposite side of where you are. All of them feature large open areas right outside the gates, well, besides Gridania, where you do the quests. Limsa Lominsa is a large open valley filled with crags, caves and lakes. Ul'dah is a rather flat plain, and Gridania, oh Christ almighty, Gridania, look at this map! It's a bunch of corridors connected to somewhat larger open areas. All of this is a consequence of the way the graphics are handled, which we'll get to later. FF14's core gameplay is very standard fare. It's just your typical gear-centric hotkey MMO combat, like, say, WoW or the Old Republic, except with auto-attacking, and this can sometimes feel like staring at a weight bar. Questing is a grind. It consists of going to your local guild, picking up a guild leave or some other type of leave, going to a camp, killing some monsters, and that's it. There's no variety unless you fancy yourself a blacksmith or a farmer, which, by the way, if you do, that is so very sad. This is followed by hitting a particular level and continuing 2 or 3 story quests. However, the advantage of this system is that it's excellent for some short-term playing. Say every few days you jump in and do a few quests for 30 minutes and jump out. It's just the kind of thing you need to freshen up your tired or bored mind, and funnily enough, is what the game is actually designed for. FF14 runs on the Crystal Tools engine, the same one used for 13. The engine itself looks very nice. Bloom is dialed back and mostly reserved for light sources. There are dynamic shadows, dynamic weather, day-night cycles. Lighting across the map looks brilliant and is at its best at dawn. Fong lighting looks good and spreads evenly across shiny surfaces. The way the game renders bump maps is nice and smooth compared to something like, say, Dead Island, which makes everything look like crumpled paper bags. And it even has some very average ambient occlusion, which is a nice addition nonetheless, especially for an MMO. It also supports in-engine super sampling, which, while interesting, is a rather bad thing, as I'll explain later. Models and textures are brilliant. Characters in particular look great. Character models, clothes, armor and weapons are rather high poly and lacking in pointy bits, very unlike an MMO. While character textures may appear a little low res, the game makes up for it by having fantastic looking environments, not a single murky, soupy looking low res thing in sight. Besides distances, the LOD is a bit short, so everything in the distance looks like it's been covered in slime. A tiny gripe is the self-shadowing. For some reason it appears to be revealing the vertices on the models, like this. Now for the bad. Like you've most likely noticed in the background, the game stutters or frame skips like crazy. This is an issue on even high-end computers like mine. Reading through forum posts, some people have said that this has to do with the way the textures are being read off the hard drive, like the code for it is poorly optimized for some reason. Another is that the engine only uses 256 megs of RAM for textures, most likely a fragment of the game's PS3 code. The way in-game resources are used is pathetic. The entire game has been designed around some sort of no loading screens ethos, meaning the maps load by streaming in the information. Unfortunately, this means that the game can only use so many resources at a time, which is why you get this unbelievably repetitive look across the whole game, especially in Gridania, which looks like the same corridor, same giant tree and same medium-sized area, about 100 times over. The game's art style is fantastic, but because of issues mentioned above, it's potentially ruined. It's practically begging for a better designed world, which is exactly what we're getting with version 2. The soundtrack was composed by Nobuo Uematsu, who you'd pretty much know from all the best Final Fantasy games, Chrono Trigger and Lost Odyssey. So obviously the soundtrack is fantastic. Here, have a listen. For some reason, the developers decided to go with some really strange voice and text hybrid for all the dialogue. Unlike in other games where there's all of either, or the voice is only used for important parts of conversations, there's no pattern to the voice acting and text here. Sometimes even major cutscenes don't have voices, but worthless interim conversations are fully voiced. Upon launch, the UI was a clusterfuck of strange design choices that ultimately collapsed upon one another in a violent, cataclysmic, gassy shit, so it's nice to see it's very simple and easy to use now. For some reason, cutscenes take an abhorrent time to load. This isn't helped by the fact that sometimes when you're given control after a cutscene, all you can do is walk 1 meter to someone right next to you, just to start another cutscene. There's meant to be an in-game economy that supports all the gear needs of the players, but there's so few people playing as farmers and blacksmiths that it's pretty much non-existent, and who can blame them? The biggest problem with this though is that the game relies almost entirely on it. Barely any shops actually sell any usable gear, and the ones that do are all low level. Who the hell decided this would be a fantastic idea? The sad thing is that the economy doesn't appear to be one of the things they decide to change for version 2, so it'll always be this shit and worthless. When you pick your class and job at the start of the game, you have to be very careful as to where you decide to start. I learned this the hard way. I had a gladiator in Gridania as my first character, only to find out I couldn't buy any gear for myself or participate in any of my class's quests, because there was no guild for gladiators in Gridania. That's an older. It doesn't even warn you that this is going to happen. Item crafting, which I have no footage of, is boring, obtuse, and is based on random chance, and I don't want to talk about it anymore. Now, I said earlier that the game supports in-engine super sampling. I won't get technical, but this is an option reserved for systems with multiple graphics cards, in other words, extremely powerful computers. Look where they put it on the graphics menu. It isn't even labeled as such. People have been wondering why the game lags so much and their computers are running so hot. Well, this is why. Set this goddamn option to standard. I won't go into the quality of the writing too much, because my highest level character is 19 or 20. Maybe the stories get better, maybe they get worse. Limsa Lominsa. Oh, how unfortunate. The area with the best starting gear has the absolute worst story of the three. It's convoluted, there's a mysterious cat lady that follows you around, and is extremely slow and boring to unfold. I'm level 19 and the story is neither picked up or decided to make sense yet. Also the text. I shit you not, is written in pirate speech. It is friggin' impossible to read without squinting and going over it 2 or 3 times. Gridania is much better. It's a rather straightforward tale about your character and 2 annoying wankers who have been attacked by Gridania's living forest and have to be cleansed of their wood sin. Along the way you meet an irritating kid who doesn't believe in the forest elementals and apparently has seen those taken by the wood hiding around somewhere in the forest and is attempting to make contact with them. I don't know much about Alder's story other than the opening, which features a giant monster, some rather flamboyant flower throwing, and a very creepy ending. I think it's the best opening of the 3. I have to admit, I have a strong bias for this game. I only paid $14 for it on eBay, and I wasn't expecting much, only to be very surprised at how good I thought it really was. I also don't like most MMOs at all. The gameplay style of MMOs I feel is extremely weak and hasn't evolved ever since its inception. This coming from an old-time Guild Wars Lineage 2 and EverQuest 2 player. I don't like WoW. I thought the Old Republic was average, Aeon was decent until the level cap, and Terra had potential but was ultimately wasted on the same archaic, crappy core systems. So, why do I like Final Fantasy XIV so much? Other than the fact it was so cheap, it has this otherworldly charm about it. A charm very few games can profess to having. Well, that's it for me. I'm off. Go fuck yourself.